The scream that tore through the winter silence was the kind that froze a man's blood faster than the January wind whipping across the mountain lake. Flynn Quinton heard it while leading his horse through the pines near Challies, Idaho, and his boots were pounding through the snow before his mind caught up with his body. He burst through the tree line and saw her, a woman in a dark blue dress thrashing in the center of the frozen lake where the ice had given way, her pale hands clawing at the jagged edges that kept breaking under her weight. Flynn did not hesitate. He ran onto the ice, his 200 pounds of cowboy and cattle rancher spreading his weight as best he could, but he could hear the groaning beneath his boots. 50 feet from shore, 30 feet from her, the surface spider webbed beneath him. 20 feet away, she went under, her dark hair spreading like ink in the water. 10 feet, and the ice buckled, but Flynn threw himself forward on his belly and slid the last distance. His hands found the edge of the hole, and he looked down into water so clear and cold it burned his eyes. She was sinking, her dress billowing around her like a shroud, her eyes wide and fixed on the circle of gray sky above. Flynn Quinton did not think about the cold, or the danger, or the fact that going into that water meant he might not come out. He thought about those eyes, brown as creek stones and full of fading light. He smashed his fist into the ice at the edge of the hole, breaking it wider, then again, his knuckles splitting and bleeding. The ice cracked and gave way, widening the opening, and Flynn plunged his arms into the water up to his shoulders. The cold bit into him like 1,000 knives, but he reached deeper, his fingers brushing fabric, then finding her arm, her wrist, her hand. He locked his fingers around hers and pulled with every ounce of strength his 6'2" frame possessed. She came up gasping and choking, water streaming from her nose and mouth. Flynn hauled her against the ice edge, then broke more ice with his elbow, widening their escape route back toward shore. He got his arms under hers, locking his hands across her chest, and kicked backward, using his body to break a path through the weakened ice. His back hit solid ice and he rolled, pulling her on top of him, then rolled again, spreading their weight, moving them away from the deadly hole. They rolled twice more before he trusted the ice enough to stand, and then he scooped her into his arms and ran for the shore with her body convulsing against his chest. On solid ground, Flynn laid her in the snow and turned her on her side. She vomited lake water and gasped, her whole body shaking so violently he thought she might break apart. He stripped off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her, then his vest, then he pulled her against him and ran for his horse. He mounted with her cradled in his arms and kicked the gelding into a gallop back toward town, toward warmth, toward life. The ranch house appeared through the swirling snow like a miracle. Flynn's younger brother Thomas was chopping wood outside the barn and dropped his axe when he saw them coming. Flynn barely remembered dismounting, or carrying her inside, or his sister-in-law Margaret appearing with blankets and hot water. He remembered standing in front of the fireplace while Margaret and Thomas stripped the woman's frozen clothes and wrapped her in quilts. Remembered Margaret ordering Thomas to heat stones in the fire and wrap them in cloth. Remembered his own hands shaking as the feeling returned to them in waves of agony. Margaret looked at him with stern eyes. "You need dry clothes yourself before you catch your death." Flynn nodded but did not move. He could not stop looking at the woman's face, pale as candle wax, her lips blue, her dark hair spread across the pillow like a raven's wing. Margaret pushed him toward his room and he went, stripping off his wet clothes with numb fingers and pulling on dry jeans and a flannel shirt. When he returned to the main room, Margaret had the woman propped up near the fire with heated stones packed around her and was spooning warm broth into her mouth. The woman's eyes opened and found Flynn across the room. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Flynn felt something shift in his chest, something he had not felt in his 32 years of living. It was not the rush of saving her life or the relief that she was breathing. It was something deeper, something that settled into his bones like they had known each other before this moment in some other life, some other time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like wind through dry grass. "You saved my life." Flynn crossed the room and knelt beside her. Up close he could see her face properly now, the fine bones of her cheeks, the full curve of her mouth, the intelligence in those brown eyes. "What is your name?" Rose Anderson." She tried to sit up straighter and winced. "I am sorry to be such trouble. I was crossing to get to town when the ice broke." "From where?" Margaret asked, sitting on the woman's other side with a mother's protective instinct already flaring, Rose's eyes clouded. "From the stage stop 5 miles north. I arrived yesterday from Virginia City, Montana. I was supposed to meet someone in Challies, but I grew impatient waiting for the stage to continue and thought I could walk it." She looked at Flynn with something like shame. "That was foolish. That was nearly fatal," Flynn said, but his voice was gentle. "Why were you coming to Challies?" Rose was quiet for a moment, and Flynn saw her weighing how much to tell these strangers. Finally she said, "I am a teacher. I was offered a position at the schoolhouse here. I have the letter with me, or I did. I do not know if anything survived the water." Margaret stood immediately. "I will check your things. Thomas hung your dress to dry. If the letter is there, we will find it." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Flynn and Rose alone except for Thomas, who was pretending to organize tools in the corner but was clearly listening to every word. Flynn settled back on his heels, studying Rose's face. "A teacher from Montana. That is a long way to come for a job." Rose met his eyes steadily despite her exhaustion. "I had my reasons for wanting to leave." Flynn recognized the tone of someone escaping something and did not push. He had seen enough people running from their pasts in the West to know when to let things lie. Instead he said, "Well, you are safe now. You will stay here until you are well enough to travel into town. It is another 3 miles and the weather is turning worse." "I cannot impose on you like that," Rose protested, but even as she spoke her eyes were drooping with exhaustion. "You are not imposing. You are recovering." Flynn stood and pulled a chair close to the fire, settling into it. "Sleep now. We will talk more when you wake." Rose tried to protest again, but sleep claimed her mid-sentence. Flynn watched her breathe, watched the color slowly return to her cheeks, watched the trembling ease. Margaret returned with the letter, water-stained but readable, and set it on the mantel to dry completely. She gave Flynn a knowing look that he ignored. Then she and Thomas retreated to give their guest peace. Flynn sat vigil through the afternoon and into the evening. He had work to do, cattle to check, fences to mend, a dozen tasks that made up the daily life of a rancher, but he could not bring himself to leave. Every time he thought about standing up, about walking away, he remembered the sight of her sinking beneath the ice, remembered the weight of her hand in his, remembered thinking that if he lost his grip on her, he would lose something precious that he had not even known existed until that moment. The fire burned low and Flynn added wood. Outside, the wind picked up and snow began to fall in earnest, the kind of January storm that could bury a house in drifts. Thomas came in stamping snow from his boots and reported that the animals were secured and the barn was battened down. Margaret brought Flynn a plate of food and coffee, squeezing his shoulder as she passed. They were good people. His brother and sister-in-law had been ever since Thomas married Margaret 4 years ago and brought her to live on the ranch Flynn had built from nothing after their parents died. Rose woke after dark, her eyes clearer now, her color better. She pushed herself up on the pile of blankets and looked around the room, orienting herself. Her gaze found Flynn in his chair, and something in her expression softened. "You stayed," she said. "I stayed. You did not have to do that." Flynn leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I pulled you out of that lake. I figure that makes you my responsibility until I know you are going to be all right." Rose smiled, a small thing but genuine. "I am all right, cold and embarrassed, but all right." She looked down at the quilts wrapped around her. "Where are my clothes? Drying. Margaret will bring you something to wear in the morning. For now you should rest." "I have rested. Now I am restless." Rose shifted, pulling the blankets tighter around her shoulders. "Tell me about yourself, Flynn Quinton. That is your name, is it not?" "I heard your sister-in-law say it." Flynn nodded. "Born and raised in Idaho Territory. My parents homesteaded here back in the 50s, built this ranch from raw land. They died of fever when I was 23 and Thomas was 18. We kept the ranch going, built it bigger. Thomas married Margaret. I have been too busy to marry, or so I tell myself." "And what do you tell yourself when you are being honest?" The question caught Flynn off guard. He sat back, considering. "I tell myself I have not met the right woman. This is hard country, hard life. It takes a certain kind of person to thrive here. Most women who come west are looking for something easier than what I can offer." Rose's eyes never left his face. "And what can you offer?" "Hard work, long winters, beautiful summers, cattle and horses and land that stretches as far as you can see, a house that is solid and warm, food on the table, safety, honesty." Flynn paused. "Love if the right woman came along, the kind that lasts." The silence that fell between them was charged with something neither of them could name yet. Rose looked away first, her cheeks coloring, and Flynn wondered if the firelight was playing tricks or if she was blushing. "That sounds like a good life to me," Rose said quietly. "Better than what I left behind." "What did you leave behind?" Rose drew a breath. "A man who thought he owned me because he wanted to marry me. A family who thought I should be grateful for his attention even though he had a temper and hands that were too quick. A town that blamed me for refusing him, said I was proud and difficult." Her voice hardened. "So I left. I saved every penny I could from tutoring and bought a ticket as far west as the money would take me. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Challies, it felt like Providence." Flynn felt anger kindle in his chest at the thought of someone raising a hand to this woman, this stranger who was somehow already not a stranger. "You were right to leave. A man who would hurt a woman is no man at all." Rose looked at him with something like wonder. "Not everyone sees it that way." "Then not everyone is worth listening to." Margaret called from the kitchen that supper was ready, and Flynn helped Rose to her feet, keeping his touch respectful, though every instinct screamed at him to pull her closer, to keep her safe, to never let her out of his sight. They ate together at the long wooden table, Rose wrapped in quilts, her wet hair drying in dark waves around her face. Thomas told stories about cattle that made Rose laugh, and Margaret asked about teaching, and Flynn mostly stayed quiet, content to watch Rose come back to life in the warmth of his home. That night, Flynn gave Rose his room and took a bedroll near the fire. He lay awake listening to the storm rage outside and thought about brown eyes and a smile that made his chest ache. He thought about the way she had looked at him when she said his life sounded good to her. He thought about the fact that in the space of one afternoon, his entire world had tilted on its axis, and he could not imagine setting it right again. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being snowed in together, of Rose gaining strength, of conversations by the fireplace that stretched late into the night. Flynn learned that Rose was 26 years old, loved poetry, could play piano though she had not touched one in years, and wanted children someday when she found the right man. Rose learned that Flynn had learned to read from his mother's books, could track anything on 4 legs, had once fought off a mountain lion with his bare hands, and wanted a family, but had begun to lose hope that it would happen for him. On the second day, Rose wore one of Margaret's dresses and helped cook breakfast over Margaret's protests. On the third day, when the snow stopped and the sun came out, Flynn took her outside to see the ranch in the crystal-clear light. They walked through snow up to their knees, Rose laughing as she slipped and Flynn caught her, his hands on her waist, her hands on his shoulders, their faces suddenly very close. "I should probably let you go," Flynn said, but he did not move. "Probably," Rose agreed, but she did not move either. They stood like that in the snow, the sun bright overhead, the world silent and white and perfect around them. Flynn saw everything he wanted in Rose's eyes, saw it reflected back at him, but he also saw fear, saw the shadow of whatever she had run from, saw her warring with herself. "I am not him," Flynn said softly. "I would never hurt you. I would die before I let anyone hurt you." "I know," Rose whispered. "That terrifies me more than anything, because I barely know you, Flynn Quinton, and yet I feel like I have known you my whole life. 3 days. How can 3 days change everything? I do not know, but they have." Flynn raised one hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I am not going to rush you, I am not going to push. But I need you to know that when I pulled you out of that lake, I did not just save your life. You saved mine too. I just did not know I needed saving until I saw you." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "What if I am not brave enough for this? You walked away from everything you knew to start over in a place you had never been. You are the bravest person I have ever met." Flynn stepped back, giving her space, though it cost him to do it. "The town will have the roads cleared soon. I will take you to Challies, introduce you to the schoolmaster, make sure you get settled. And then, if you want, I will court you properly. Slowly. Let you set the pace. And if you decide you do not want that, I will respect it and step back. But I had to tell you, I had to say it out loud." Rose wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. 3 days, she said again, but this time she was smiling through her tears. "You are either the best man I have ever met or completely insane." "Can I be both?" she laughed, the sound like music. "Yes, I think you can." Flynn drove Rose into Challies the next morning in a wagon, with Margaret's dresses packed in a trunk and her teaching certificate dried and pressed flat. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with false front buildings and people hurrying about their business. The schoolhouse stood at the east end of town, a neat white building with a bell tower and windows that sparkled in the sun. The schoolmaster was a portly man named Jacob Hughes, who seemed delighted to finally have a teacher after months of searching. He showed Rose the schoolroom with its rows of desks and chalkboard, the small apartment attached to the back where she would live, the shelves of books donated by families in town. Rose's face glowed as she walked through the space, touching the desks, the books, the globe on its wooden stand. "This is perfect," she said to Hughes, then looked at Flynn. "This is absolutely perfect." Flynn felt his heart crack open at the joy in her voice. He had been half hoping she would decide not to take the position, would choose to stay at the ranch with him, but he could see this was what she needed. Her own place, her own purpose, a chance to prove to herself that she could stand on her own feet. He would not take that from her, no matter how much he wanted to. Hughes left them alone to talk, and Rose turned to Flynn with shining eyes. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for taking care of me, for bringing me here. It was my honor." Flynn held his hat in his hands, twisting the brim. "I meant what I said yesterday, about courting you proper. If you will let me, I would like to come calling. Take you to dinner, to church socials, whatever you want. Let you get to know me while you get settled here." Rose crossed the room and took his hands. "I would like that very much. But Flynn, I need time. I need to know I can do this on my own first, that I am choosing you because I want to, not because I need rescuing." "I understand." Flynn squeezed her hands gently. "You take all the time you need. I will be here when you are ready." So began the courtship. Flynn came to town every Sunday after church to take Rose to dinner at the hotel restaurant. He came on Wednesday evenings to walk with her along the river. He came on Saturday afternoons to help her prepare lessons for the week ahead. He brought her flowers from Margaret's garden, books from his mother's collection, a new slate for the schoolhouse. He met her students and they adored him, the tall cowboy who could rope a chair from across the room and tell stories about wrestling steers. Rose bloomed under the attention and the freedom. She threw herself into teaching with a passion that inspired the whole town. She started a lending library in the schoolroom, organized spelling bees and recitations, stayed late to tutor children who struggled. She made friends with the other women in Challies, joined the church choir, became part of the fabric of the community. And slowly, carefully, she let Flynn into her heart. It happened in small moments. The way he listened when she talked about her day, truly listened, asking questions and remembering details. The way he never pressed her for more than she was ready to give, content to sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours, whatever she needed. The way he brought Thomas and Margaret to town so Rose could get to know them better, building connections between her new life and the people who mattered to him. The way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world, like she hung the moon and stars, but never made her feel trapped or owned by that devotion. Summer came, and Flynn taught Rose to ride. They spent long evenings on horseback in the mountains, watching the sun set over the peaks, talking about everything and nothing. He showed her the high meadows where wildflowers grew in carpets of color, the hidden valleys where elk grazed, the cold streams full of trout. She showed him poetry and music, played the piano in the church, and sang songs that made his throat tight with emotion. Autumn arrived and Rose had been in Challies for 9 months. The school year was in full swing, and she had 23 students ranging from 6 to 15 years old. Flynn had helped her organize a harvest festival that brought the whole community together. They were sitting on the schoolhouse steps afterward, watching the last families leave, the lanterns bobbing in the darkness. "I love you," Rose said suddenly, turning to face him. "I think I have loved you since the moment I opened my eyes and saw you sitting beside the fire watching over me. But I needed to be sure I could stand on my own first. And now I am sure. I love you, Flynn Quinton. I want to marry you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Flynn felt like he had been struck by lightning. Joy surged through him so powerful he could barely breathe. He took Rose's face in his hands, looking into those brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for months, and said, "I have loved you since I saw you sinking beneath the ice. I loved you before I even knew your name. Marry me, Rose Anderson. Marry me and let me spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy." Their first kiss tasted like autumn air and apples and forever. Flynn pulled Rose into his lap and kissed her like a drowning man, like she was air and water and life itself. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands in his hair, her body pressed against his, 9 months of careful restraint finally breaking free. They kissed until they were breathless and laughing, until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew cold. They married in October of 1874 in the little church in Challies, with half the town in attendance. Margaret stood up as Rose's matron of honor, Thomas as Flynn's best man. Rose wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and carried wildflowers from the meadow where Flynn had first told her he loved her. Flynn wore his best suit and could not stop grinning, even when Thomas teased him about it. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Flynn kissed his bride as the congregation cheered. They held the reception in the schoolhouse, the desks pushed back to make room for dancing. Flynn waltzed Rose around the room while the fiddler played, and he whispered in her ear all the ways he was going to love her, all the life they were going to build together, all the dreams they would make real. That night, Flynn brought Rose home to the ranch, carried her over the threshold of the house that was now theirs, and laid her down in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives. He made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes, showing her with his hands and mouth and body what words could never fully express. Rose gave herself to him completely. All fear and hesitation burned away in the heat of their love, replaced by trust and desire, and a joy so complete it felt like coming home. In the morning they woke tangled together, sunlight streaming through the windows, and Flynn thought about the day he had heard a scream across a frozen lake. He thought about how close he had come to never meeting this woman, never knowing this love, and it terrified him. But then Rose opened her eyes and smiled at him, that smile that lit up his whole world, and the fear faded. They had found each other. Against all odds, through ice and storm and fear, they had found each other. That was all that mattered. Rose continued teaching through that winter, riding into town with Flynn each morning and home each evening. It was not traditional, but nothing about their courtship had been traditional, and the town had grown to love Rose too much to object. In the spring, when Rose discovered she was carrying their first child, she taught until her condition became too obvious to ignore, then trained her replacement and retired to the ranch. Their son was born in December of 1875, 2 weeks before Christmas. Flynn paced the floor while Margaret attended Rose, and when he finally heard the baby cry, he nearly broke down the door getting into the room. Rose was exhausted and radiant, holding a red-faced, squalling infant with dark hair like his mother and strong lungs like his father. "Meet your son," Rose said, and Flynn took the baby in his big, work-roughened hands with a gentleness he had not known he possessed. They named him William Thomas Quinton, after Flynn's father and his brother. Flynn spent hours just staring at his son, marveling at the tiny fingernails and the way the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. He watched Rose nurse the baby and sang to them both, old songs his mother had sung to him. He got up in the night when William cried and walked the floor with him, this tiny perfect person who was half him and half Rose, all miracle. Rose recovered from the birth and threw herself into motherhood with the same passion she had brought to teaching. She was patient and loving and fierce in protecting their son. Flynn watched her and fell in love all over again, deeper this time, seeing her with their child. He worked the ranch with renewed purpose, building their herd, improving the land, creating something lasting to pass down to William and whatever other children they might have. 2 years later, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine Margaret, after Flynn's mother and his sister-in-law. She had Rose's brown eyes and Flynn's stubborn chin, and she owned her father's heart from the moment she took her first breath. Flynn was hopelessly outnumbered now, surrounded by love and noise and the beautiful chaos of family, and he would not have changed a thing. The years rolled past like water. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and books in equal measure. Catherine was wild and fearless, riding before she could barely walk, trailing after her father everywhere he went. A third child joined them in 1880, another boy they named Henry, who had a gift for music and a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. Flynn and Rose built their life one day at a time, through good seasons and bad, through harsh winters and perfect summers, through the thousand small moments that make up a marriage. They fought sometimes, both of them too stubborn for their own good, but they always worked it out, always came back to the love that had started on a frozen lake in January. They made love in the hayloft and beside the creek and in their bed under quilts in the winter. They raised their children to be kind and brave and honest. They grew old together, their hair going gray, their bodies softening with age, their love deepening into something unshakable. Thomas and Margaret had 4 children of their own, and the ranch rang with the sound of cousins playing, of family dinners that lasted for hours, of holidays celebrated with joy and laughter. The house Flynn's parents had built was expanded and improved, new rooms added for the growing family, a bigger barn, a second house for Thomas and his brood. Rose never went back to teaching full-time, but she tutored children in the area and started a school fund that helped families who could not afford to send their children. Flynn served on the town council and helped Challies grow from a rough frontier town into a real community. They were pillars of the church, the kind of people others looked to in times of trouble, the kind of marriage others aspired to. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Flynn took Rose back to the lake where he had pulled her from the ice. It was summer now, the water blue and peaceful, surrounded by wildflowers. They stood on the shore holding hands, both of them thinking about that winter day that had changed everything. "You ever wonder what would have happened if the ice had not broken?" Rose asked. "If I had made it across safely and just gone to the schoolhouse and started teaching." Flynn pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, his chin on her shoulder. "We would have met anyway. I would have come to town for supplies, seen you walking, and that would have been it for me. The ice just sped things up." Rose leaned back against him, smiling. "You think fate would have brought us together no matter what? I know it would have. You are my destiny, Rose Quinton. You always were. I just did not know it until I saw you drowning." Rose turned in his arms and kissed him, long and sweet and full of 25 years of love. "Then I am grateful for the ice, for the cold, for the fear, because it brought me to you." They made love that afternoon in the meadow above the lake, their bodies still knowing each other after all these years, their hearts still racing at each other's touch. They talked about their children, how William was courting a nice girl from town, how Catherine had announced she wanted to go to college and become a veterinarian, how Henry was already composing his own music at 10 years old. They talked about the future, about grandchildren they might have someday, about growing old on this land they both loved. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Flynn held his wife close and thought about the moment his life had truly begun. Not when he was born, not when his parents died, not when he built the ranch, but on a frozen January day when he heard a scream and ran toward it instead of away, when he broke ice with his bleeding fists and pulled a drowning woman from death. When brown eyes met his and something eternal clicked into place. "Thank you," Flynn said softly. "For what? For falling through the ice, for letting me save you, for saving me right back." Rose smiled against his chest, her arms tight around him. "Always. In this life and whatever comes after. Always." They rode home in the twilight, side by side as they had been for 25 years, as they would be for the rest of their lives. The ranch appeared in the distance, lights glowing in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Their children would be there, waiting for them, along with Thomas and Margaret and all the love they had built together. Flynn and Rose had started with nothing but ice water and desperate determination. They had built an empire of love, a legacy that would last for generations. Every child and grandchild who would come after them would owe their existence to that single moment when a cowboy heard a scream and refused to turn away. When he broke ice with his fists and reached into freezing water to save a stranger who would become his whole world. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons. William married his sweetheart Emma in 1897 and gave Flynn and Rose their first grandchild, a girl named Rose after her grandmother. Catherine did go to college, one of the first women in Idaho to do so, and returned to practice veterinary medicine in Challis and the surrounding ranches. She married late, at 30, to a doctor named Samuel who appreciated her independence and brilliance. Henry became a music teacher, traveling between small towns in Idaho and Montana, bringing culture and beauty to the frontier, though he always came home to the ranch for Christmas. Flynn and Rose watched their children succeed and struggle and grow, supported them through heartbreaks, and celebrated their triumphs. They became grandparents 7 times over, and the ranch house was never quiet, always full of children running and playing and learning to ride the way their parents had. In 1904, on a clear January day 30 years after they first met, Flynn took Rose back to the lake one more time. They were in their 50s now, their hair more silver than brown, their faces lined with years of sun and laughter and tears. But when Rose looked at Flynn, she still saw the strong young cowboy who had crashed through the ice to save her. And when Flynn looked at Rose, he still saw the woman who had changed his life with a single glance. They stood on the frozen surface, careful this time, testing the ice before they walked out to the spot where Rose had fallen through. A marker stood there now, placed by the town after a child had nearly drowned in the same spot 5 years earlier. The town had put up warnings and safety ropes, making sure no one else would face what Rose had faced. 30 years, Rose said, looking down at the ice beneath her feet. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Flynn took her hand, their gloved fingers interlacing. It is yesterday and forever. Every day with you has been both. They walked back to shore slowly, savoring the winter sunlight, the peace of the mountains, the life they had built. Back at the ranch, their family was gathering for a celebration, 30 years of marriage and love and partnership. There would be food and music and stories, all their children and grandchildren together under one roof, the legacy of that day playing out in every laugh and smile. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Flynn and Rose sat by the fire as they had done countless times before. Rose leaned against Flynn's shoulder, his arm around her, their bodies fitting together perfectly after 3 decades of practice. "I would do it all again," Rose said softly. "Every moment, every fear, every struggle, all of it just to end up here with you." Flynn kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, still familiar after all these years. "I would break through that ice 1,000 times to save you, and I would fall in love with you 1,000 more." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance, listening to the wind outside and the creaking of the house settling. This house that had witnessed their love story, that held memories in every corner, that would stand long after they were gone as a testament to what they had built. Flynn thought about the young man he had been, lonely and resigned to a life alone, working his ranch and wondering if this was all there was. He thought about the moment everything changed, the scream across the ice, the decision to run toward danger instead of away. He thought about how one choice, one act of courage or foolishness or fate, had given him everything that mattered. Rose thought about the frightened woman she had been, running from a man who wanted to own her, desperate for freedom even if it meant being alone. She thought about the ice breaking beneath her feet, the terror of sinking, the absolute certainty that she was going to die. She thought about the moment strong hands grabbed hers, the moment she broke the surface and saw Flynn's face, and knew with sudden clarity that she had not been running away from something. She had been running toward him, toward the life they would build together. "I love you," they said together, the words as natural as breathing, as necessary as heartbeats. The fire burned low and they banked it for the night. Flynn helped Rose to her feet, his hands gentle on her waist, and they walked to their bedroom hand in hand. They undressed slowly, comfortably, with the ease of long familiarity. They slipped under the quilts that Rose had made, that Margaret had made, that Flynn's mother had made before her, layers of warmth and love wrapped around them. Flynn pulled Rose close, her back to his chest, his arm draped over her waist. She laced her fingers through his and sighed, content and safe and home. They fell asleep the way they had for 30 years, wrapped around each other, hearts beating in synchrony, breathing the same air. Outside, snow began to fall softly over the ranch, covering everything in white, making the world new again. The lake froze solid under the winter cold, waiting for spring to break its surface and bring it back to life. And in the house Flynn Quinton had built with his own hands, love continued its work, a fire that never went out, a warmth that would outlast stone and ice and time itself. Their story had started with drowning and ended with salvation, but the truth was simpler and more profound than that. Two souls had found each other in the vastness of the West, had recognized something essential and eternal, and had chosen each other every single day thereafter. The ice had brought them together, but love had kept them there, through every season, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow. And when Flynn and Rose finally passed from this world, many years later, they went together the way they had lived, hand in hand, surrounded by the family they had created, leaving behind a legacy of love that would echo through generations. Their great-grandchildren would tell the story of how it all began, of the cowboy who broke ice with his fists to save a drowning woman, of the teacher who fell through the lake and found her soulmate, of the love that had started on the coldest day of winter and burned brighter than any summer sun. The ranch would continue, passing from one generation to the next, the land Flynn and Rose had loved still producing life and beauty and purpose. The lake would freeze and thaw with the seasons, marking time the way it always had, indifferent to the human dramas played out on its shores. But the love story would persist, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are doorways to the best, that courage and compassion can change everything, that true love is worth fighting for, worth breaking ice for, worth every risk and every fear. Flynn and Rose Quinton had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with meaning and connection and joy. And it had all started with a scream across a frozen lake, with a choice to run toward danger, with bleeding fists breaking ice, with a hand reaching down into darkness to pull someone into the light. That was the moment their forever began. Everything else was just the beautiful unfolding of destiny fulfilling itself, of two hearts that had always been meant to beat as one finally finding their way home.